Chapter 1, A Hero's Start. Izuku Midoriyia, son of Inko Midoriyia, who after recently turning 5 years old grew more and more excited about his visit to the doctor to finally see what his quirk is going to be since he hadn't shown signs of one. There's one thing in the world young Izuku is certain of, and that is he wants to be a hero when he grows up. Little did he know that after that visit things will never be the same for him again. After being greeted by the doctor, he turned to the two and spoke. "Please have a seat." Inko and Izuku have a seat across from the doctor in his office. The doctor then said, "We've done all of the standard tests on your son, and after an x-ray we've determined that Izuku is quirkless." The 5-year-old green-haired little boy, who for as long as he could remember wanting to become a hero, heard the only thing that could shatter his hopes of achieving that dream. Izuku, with his eyes swelling with tears, sat devastated from just those 3 words that were just spoken. Inko and the doctor discussed more details of the test results, but it all fell on deaf ears as Izuku wallowed in despair due to the news of him not having a quirk. The doctor wished the family luck and walked them both to the door. After exiting the doctor's office, Inko looked down to her son and saw nothing but hurt in his emotionless expression. This made her grow a concern for Izuku's well-being. Like any parent would, she looked for a way to distract him from his thoughts. She then turned to him and asked, "What would you like for dinner, sweetie?" But she didn't receive a reply. Noticing the distraught gaze on her son's face, knowing that he would be this way for a while, she hurried to get both of them home so she could comfort him as best as possible. After arriving home, Izuku just walked to his room, not saying a word. He then sat at his desk to put on his favorite video that always brought him pleasure and gave him inspiration. He watched All Might's debut video of him saving 100 people in one night over and over again. After refusing to eat, Inko just sat beside Izuku, trying her best to console him, when suddenly he looked up to ask her something. She noticed his gesture, then looked at him before he said, "Mom, do you think I could still be a hero like All Might?" Inko, not knowing how to answer, looked into his eyes and thought back to the day when she realized she would do anything to protect her son no matter what. She knew what she said next could possibly make or break Izuku, so she said something that neither one of them expected. "Yes, you will have to work extremely hard, but I will help you every step of the way." Izuku, after hearing his mother's words, wiped away his falling tears and hugged his mother, feeling grateful of her encouraging words. "Thank you, Mom. I will try my best to become strong one day just like All Might and make you proud." Listening to her son's words, she had no choice but to figure out a way to help her son achieve what will most likely be an impossible dream. The next day, Inko would do some research and formulate a workout routine that will allow her son to acquire the skills and strength to one day be a hero, with safety being the first priority. This was the first step that would lead the Midoriyas on a path they both would have never seen coming. After 7 years of a steady workout schedule, Izuku had become a towering figure, casting a shadow over his former self due to his regiment of running 10 kilometers every day, doing sit-ups, squats, push-ups and burpees until his body gave out. He also started doing martial arts in order to defend himself in a fight or to save others who couldn't defend themselves. Although it took some time to get up to that amount of exercise, Izuku would always press forward, remembering his goal and what it would take to obtain it. One day, after a grueling workout, Izuku laid on his back, panting and breathing heavily underneath a nearby tree in attempt to hide from the day's Sunday. It had been exceptionally hot out that day, so the comfort the shade brought helped immensely for the rest period. Remembering that he wasn't alone, he looked out the corner of his eyes to see his mother in full stride, trying to beat her previous times from the day before. Inko, dressed in a similar outfit of a white t-shirt, black workout shorts and red running shoes, continued her jog around the track. He smiled in admiration from his mother's commitment to sticking beside her son. The image of his mother made Izuku think back to when he was 7 and his mom started taking him walking around the track in the nearby park every day after school so he could get some exercise. "After a while I started outpacing my mother, so she started running to keep up with me. The next thing I knew, she inadvertently started coming with me every day when I left the house to do my routine. She didn't go as hard as I did, but she kept up nonetheless. Inko, upon finishing her last lap, jogged over to the tree where her son resided and gently laid next to him. While catching her breath, Inko gasped and spoke. "I almost caught up to you today, son." Something she would recite to Izuku after losing their weekly race since he had gotten fast enough to outrun her. Izuku, who just chuckled, turned to his mother then said, "Yeah, maybe next time, Mom." The two just laughed and laid there enjoying their restful period before heading home. After their brief walk back to their home, the Midoriyas decided on having shrimp tempura with rice for dinner and some ice cream for dessert. Izuku headed to his room for a quick shower before preparing the dinner table. After showering, Izuku looked around his room, noticing that he left some free weights there from the previous weekend's workout. Not wanting to let his room get cluttered, he decided to put them back in their proper place. While carrying the weights back into his home gym, he reminisced about when he first got his weight bench from a garage sale he stumbled across while him and his mother was out for a run. It took almost a year before his mother trusted him enough to lift the weights without having her there to spot him. Nonetheless, he was always glad to have her around. Once the food was done, Inko and Izuku talked about getting ready for school so that he wouldn't be late like the day before. Slightly irritated, he just said, "Yes, Mom, I promise it won't happen again." Inko responded, "We'll see." The mother grinned at her son while he sat there trying to portray as much innocence as possible. After finishing their meals, the two retired to their rooms for the evening. Izuku laid in his bed thinking to himself about what tomorrow's school day was going to be like. Remembering he had more problems than just a bunch of homework, he couldn't help but think of his struggles with the bullies that he encountered daily. Ever since he was diagnosed as quirkless, his peers never viewed him the same again, especially his former friend Katsuki Bakugo. The following school day, after hearing the news, Izuku told his classmates and all but a few ridiculed him. Katsuki, leading the charge in the minors' verbal assault, decided to nickname me Deku, meaning useless, because I didn't have a quirk. Although their words hurt him dearly, Izuku tried his best to never show how much it really bothered him. He didn't want their teasing to get him down, so he just ignored the words and went on about his day like they weren't even there. Although when the bullies who followed Kaken's leads got annoyed by his efforts, that's when the attacks started. Young Izuku would try his best to fend them off, but their abilities gave them the advantage over the quirkless boy. This went on for a few years until one day when Izuku came home with a bruise on his face. Inko, visibly upset, demanded her son to tell her what happened. Hesitant at first, knowing his mother would most likely over-exaggerate, Izuku reluctantly told his mother what happened. Inko, steaming mad after hearing the details, started levitating all of the furniture in the nearby room out of anger. Izuku did everything he could to calm his mom down so she wouldn't hurt the boys or destroy the once floating couches, tables and chairs. Forgetting that she had been training her quirk ever since she started working out with her son, she'd often forget that it would activate sometimes with the right emotional trigger. Inko, listening to her son's plea, compromised with him to not go down to the school to wring the bullies' necks, but Izuku would have to learn how to defend himself as an alternative. Izuku agreed to her conditions and the next day went to find a trainer to help him with some self-defense techniques. With his analytical skills and ability to adapt, it wouldn't take long for Izuku to pick up some skills to defend himself in a fight. After school one day, Izuku was walking home and was suddenly surrounded by Kaken along with his wayward lackeys. Not wanting things to end up like last time, Izuku strategically maneuvered himself so that his back was against the nearest wall. He started pleading with the three boys in order to give them the impression that he didn't want any trouble. The sight of the green-haired boy groveling was not enough for Bakugo, so he decided to establish his dominance over his classmate. He tells him, "Deku, you're such a pathetic loser and you'll never be a hero no matter how much you tried." Izuku replied, "Yes, I can, just like Crimson Riot over there." When the boys turned their heads to see if the hero was indeed behind them, Izuku took this opportunity to stop his beating before it ever happened. Bakugo, realizing he'd been played, turned back to his victim only to have his face be met by a right hook coming from his former friend. After learning how to put his power and all of his weight into his punches, Izuku landed a clean hit, knocking out his tormentor. Bakugo, being caught off guard, never seen the punch coming, took the hit and fell to the ground, almost instantly falling unconscious. Seeing that their leader had been taken out so quickly, the two sidekicks ran in fear of having the same done to them. Izuku, after realizing what he had done, hurried to the unconscious boy's side to verify he was still breathing and didn't need any other immediate medical attention. He then ran back inside to his school, alerting the nearest adult that Kaken had passed out, before running back home feeling good that he had bested his bully. Knowing that Kaken would want revenge on the boy, he started leaving school from a different exit every day and never taking the same route home in order to stay out of the bully's reach. It had been 2 years since that had happened, and Bakugo would always look for an opportunity to catch Izuku alone so he could have a rematch from when he was 10. But with careful planning, Izuku avoided him at all costs outside of school, and he always made sure he was within eyesight of teachers while he was on school grounds. Waking up the next day, Izuku decided to go to the comic book store to grab a copy of the latest issue of Static Shock that had just come out. The store was close enough to his school that Izuku would stop by there often without running the risk of being late. After making his purchase, Izuku left out of the store and bent the corner to see blonde spikes sitting above the angry scowl of his former best friend. With fury pouring from his eyes and veins popping out all over his face, the blonde said, "Deku, I finally caught you and now you're mine." Izuku said to himself. "Uh-oh, this isn't good." Izuku was caught off guard but prepared himself for this day just in case he was ever cornered. On pure instinct, Izuku then darted into the street, avoiding cars as he zipped across the busy intersection. Putting his newly gained physique to the test, he broke out into a full-speed run, trying his best not to be caught. Not expecting the green-haired boy to take such a risk, Bakugo tried his best to catch up with the boy, but without getting in trouble for illegal quirk usage, he wouldn't be able to catch up with his former friend's speed. The chase went on for 10 blocks when Izuku disappeared down an alley. Noticing where he went, Bakugo followed but lost eyes on the green-haired boy. He would search all over but come up with nothing. Tired and frustrated, Bakugo gave up on the search, knowing that he missed out on his chance at revenge on the quirkless boy who bested him just a few years ago. The blonde boy would then take his leave, not noticing Izuku hiding in a nearby abandoned building. Izuku watched as an upset Bakugo took his leave from the search of the boy. After exiting from the building, he started dusting himself off from the debris and spider webs he encountered after finding his hiding spot. Izuku started his walk back towards school when he heard something odd coming from the other end of the alley. He decided to walk down there to figure out exactly what it is that caught his attention when he came across a young girl being held at gunpoint just a few feet from him. Apparently, she had been held hostage, but due to the danger, the police who were there didn't want to act and get the girl hurt. Izuku, not knowing what to do, started muttering to himself, thinking of the best way to handle this situation in order to save that girl. While in deep thought, he heard the sniffling and crying of the girl being held at gunpoint. He then thought back to the first time he witnessed a hero saving a bystander on the street from a quirk-wielding bad guy who terrorized a local neighborhood. He felt a fire build up in his gut and adrenaline started coursing through his veins. Izuku started looking around for a way to disarm the gunman without being noticed when he looked up and saw a light hanging from the side of the building right next to him. Izuku then picked up a rock off of the ground and started timing out how long it would take for him to reach the gunman before he realized his plan. The next thing you know, Izuku took off running while simultaneously throwing the rock he had picked up at the light hanging near the bad guy's head. The rock made contact, shattering the glass, which causes the gunman to look up, distracting him long enough for Izuku to kick off of the nearby wall to get the clearance he needed to jump on the gunman's back, which causes him to let the girl go in the process. Not knowing what just happened, the girl turned around to see a green-haired boy flailing around while holding onto her attacker with every ounce of strength he had. Izuku then turned to the girl and yelled, "Run! Get out of here!" The girl, still scared about everything she was experiencing, nodded and ran to the police out of harm's way, while Izuku hung on for dear life to the gunman, giving the girl time to get away. Izuku, thinking of the martial arts lessons he's had, used some of the moves he practiced with his trainer to keep his grip while not being slung around like a rag doll. In an effort to remove the kid, the man dropped his weapon, freeing his hands in order to finally grab hold of the preteen, but when he got a hold of Izuku, the police had stormed into the alley, tackling the man to the ground and saving the boy from any further harm. Once the chaos had settled and the man was in custody, the police started to take the statements of the children, but not before scolding the young man for the risks he took and commending the girl for being so brave while being under duress. Izuku, knowing what could happen if his mother found out, quickly looked for a way to escape out of this jam when the girl he helped rescue walked up to him and gave him a hug. Not knowing what to do, he just hugged back. The girl then said, "Thank you for saving me." Izuku, having his mother be the only other girl he had ever hugged, this caused him to blush and become flustered. He then said, "You're quite welcome," while saying to himself she has the most amazing smile he had ever seen in his life. He then noticed her black hair with eyes to match, being captivated in her cuteness. Snapping out of that quick trance, Izuku noticed that the police weren't watching the squad car where him and the girl were ordered to remain. So, he decided to escape while they were distracted, but before he made his leave, the girl asked the boy, "What is your name?" Izuku, pausing for a second, thought about just telling her his name, but because he didn't want his real identity to be discovered by the police, he then turned to the girl with a smile and simply said, "Deku," hoping if she repeated the name to the police, they wouldn't be able to track him down later on. She then said, "You're my hero." With a very innocent look in her eyes and amazing smile, she then grabbed one of Izuku's hands with his palms facing up and placed hers over it. Her hand started to glow for a second, then it stopped. Once she moved her hand, he saw a badge with the symbol for hero etched into it. Izuku, astonished by this girl's amazing quirk, commending her for being so sweet, said, "Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again one day." He then looked back to see if he had an opening. Once the coast was clear, Izuku took off, leaving the girl alone, but knowing she'll be safe with the police. Now he just had to make sure he wasn't caught by the authorities fleeing the scene. After arriving late to school yet again, Izuku was greeted by the principal, informing him that he'll be serving detention afterwards with him. Izuku gasped and just sauntered to his homeroom class. As he put his book bag in his locker, he saw the badge that the girl gave him and just smiled. He then said to himself, "Step 1 to becoming a hero complete." We then time skip to Izuku being in his last year of junior high, jotting down ideas in one of his journals, trying to integrate a better workout regimen into his training schedule. But whenever Izuku would concentrate that hard, his muttering would start up at an uncontrollable pace. "Midoriyia!" his teacher had yelled, knowing it'll startle the boy and knock him out of his trance. Realizing what he had been doing, he closed his journal and put it away so he could pay more attention to the lesson on the blackboard. Out the corner of his eye, he noticed Bakugo giving him a death glare like he did on occasion, always reminding him to avoid his foe at all costs. Glancing down at his collar, Midoriyia admired the badge he earned from rescuing that girl years ago, now wondering how she is doing. After going through something so traumatic, Izuku hoped she was doing okay wherever she was. He followed the news very carefully due to his hero obsession, but when he got home that day after helping rescue that girl, he never encountered any details on her or himself in the news story. The piece of information that the news had divulged was that a hostage was rescued by police that day, and thanks to the quick thinking of a veteran cop, everyone left the scene unscathed. He would smirk at that, only to be relieved the police never found out his identity. Being snapped out of another one of his trances by the sound of his teacher calling his name, Izuku realized that everyone had left for the day except for him. He packed his bag quickly and headed out the door, hoping he hadn't missed his train home from the nearby station. Taking his usual deviated route but at a later than normal time, Izuku noticed a familiar presence waiting for him at the end of the street. With fire in his eyes and determination written all over his face, Bakugo screams to Izuku, "There's nowhere to run this time." But Izuku wasn't going to make it that easy. Due to having this neighborhood memorized, he knew every twist and turn it had to offer. Quickly turning around and heading in the opposite direction, Izuku started dodging explosions and flying debris while keeping his lead on his attacker. He then leaped into an old lady's yard who he had met previously after avoiding her flowers, quickly waving as he scaled her fence yet again. Knowing that he gave himself a window of opportunity, he ran into a familiar construction site, knowing of its multiple hiding spots. Jumping into the cab of a nearby piece of machinery, Izuku hid while hearing his attacker approaching. Out of breath and pissed off, Kaken started yelling for Izuku to come out and face him. "Deku. You coward, stop running and face me like you should have back then." Knowing that he wouldn't get a response, Bakugo started blasting possible hiding places in order to expose where Izuku was hiding. He blew up several piles of rocks, 3 porta potties and several trash cans. Now snarling, Bakugo continued his search angrily for the boy, but to no avail due to Izuku's quick thinking and planning ahead. Scanning over the site once again, Bakugo realized just how much destruction he caused in his pursuit and decided to leave before anyone realized he was responsible for all of that damage. Once the coast was clear, Izuku exited his hiding spot and started making his way home, being careful to avoid his usual route so he wouldn't get caught off guard again. As Izuku started walking down the street, it led him through a tunnel. As he walked through it, he heard a noise coming from a sewer grate that he had just passed. The next thing he knew, a villain with a quirk that turns his body into sludge popped out of the sewer, quickly rushing after the boy. Izuku jumped out of the way of his attack and dodged as best he could until one of the sludge-like limbs ended up making contact. Izuku struggled with everything he had to fight off the villain. But the boy started to be enveloped by the monster's quirk when out of nowhere Izuku was suddenly hit with a massive force of wind pressure so strong it freed him from the grips of the villain and blasting the sludge-powered individual into pieces. Being knocked unconscious from that attack, Izuku woke up to the worried words of Japan's #1 hero. Izuku opened his eyes as wide as possible and exclaimed, "All Might." Everything from here on went just like it did in canon until about 3 months into the assignment of cleaning Dagobah Beach All Might had given to young Midoriyia. All Might arrived at the beach at 5 a.m. like clockwork, but when he went to his usual vantage point to oversee young Midoriya's progress, his jaw dropped at what he just saw. Not only was the entire beach clear of trash, but he even cleaned outside of his designated work area. All Might looked to the other end of the beach as his future successor was jogging along the coastline while curling weights. Izuku, finally noticing All Might, stopped his run to meet up with his new trainer. As he approached, Toshinori couldn't help but see a younger version of himself in young Midoriya's, almost matching his teenage physique he once had after all of his training with Gran Torino. All Might approached the boy and said, "Young Midoriya, how were you able to do your assignment so quickly? You didn't have any help, did you?" All Might asked curiously with one eyebrow raised, only to be impressed and disturbed by the answer he received. Izuku then says to All Might, "No sir, seeing as though I don't really have any friends, I wouldn't know who to ask for help besides my mother, and that would defeat the purpose of me getting strong enough to inherit your quirk." All Might just smiles and then says, "Well kid, it seems like I might have been underestimating you and how long it would take you to harness my power. After everything you've told me about your prior training and exceeding all my expectations, I believe you're to become the 9th wielder of One for All." Izuku, with stars in his eyes, looks to All Might and says, "I will do my best to make you proud of me, All Might." All Might then reaches up to his scalp, plucks out a single strand of hair and hands it to Izuku before saying, "Eat this." Izuku, with a look of confusion, just stares at All Might with a blank and shocked expression. Once All Might explained everything to Midoriya, he ate the hair and waited a few hours for it to be digested into his system. With about 7 months until the entrance exam, Izuku would spend his remaining time sparring with All Might and learning to control One for All. On the day of the entrance exam, Izuku made sure he arrived early so that he didn't make a bad impression with the faculty of UA. While taking in all sights that the campus had to offer, he noticed a familiar blonde foe walking into the entrance of the building. They glared at each other, noticing their physical differences since they had last seen each other. They both stood at a height of 5 foot 8 inches and a lot more toned. The two glanced at one another as they quietly walked into the campus door. Bakugo, breaking the silence, said to Izuku just so only he could hear, You better watch your back in there, Deku, because if you cross my path. Bakugo then stuck his hand on a nearby wall, compressing an explosion into its surface, leaving burns and fractures all along the wall. Not even flinching at the threat, Izuku continued his pace as if the boy wasn't even there. Taken his seat in the auditorium after finishing the written portion of the exam, Izuku awaited the instructions from President Mike on how the practical was going to be handled. Once Mike was finished, Izuku found out that all participants will be split into groups to be sent to various different zones for the exams. Izuku, spotting which bus he had to be on, then started heading that way. Luckily, the exam site wasn't too far from campus, so he didn't have to be on the crowded bus for long. After everyone exited the bus and made their way to the entrance of the exam site, Izuku then took his time to look over all of the future classmates he would get to know if they passed the test. He saw a cute brown-haired girl pressing her fingers together and releasing them in a repetitive motion. To her left there was that blue-haired boy who interrupted President Mike about a missing detail in his presentation, and then his eyes scanned over to see Bakugo, who just glared at him like a heavyweight boxer staring at his next opponent. Not letting that bother him, he noticed a girl with a quirk that allowed her to transform into a tall beast-like creature, a transformation that astonished the young man and caused him to start speculating on the ins and outs of her quirk. Once Izuku concentrated that hard on anything, his muttering would start, and it would take a sudden jolt for the young green-haired boy to snap out of it. Next thing you know, he heard President Mike yell, "What are you doing, kid?" Midoriyia snapped out of it due to the sound of his instructor to notice that the test had already started, and all other participants had already entered the zone. Quickly gathering his bearings, Izuku charged up his quirk and green lighting started sparking off his body. In a flash he took off running, causing a small sonic boom in the process, shocking everyone in the monitor room except for All Might, who was trying his best to be impartial and not showing favoritism to the boy who he had chosen to be his successor. All Might then decided to look in on all the other students to watch their progress, and he acknowledges that there's a lot of capable talent in the testing pool this year. Bakugo dismantling every robot he came across, Aoyama blasting 2 pointers into pieces with his naval laser, but then All Might saw something that caught his eye and gasps, then says, "Oop, looks like someone could use some help." The other heroes looked down at the monitor to see a girl being chased by a number of robots and then being cornered off at every turn. She then turned to use her quirk, which turned her palms into rocket launchers, which allowed her to blast away any oncoming robots. Once the dust from the impact had cleared, she saw that she was still surrounded, so she decided to climb up a fire escape on the adjacent building just above her pursuers. Once she was out of sight, she stopped to catch her breath, only for the robots to yank down the fire escape, causing her to fall from the second story of the building. Bracing for her doom, the girl then felt something wrap around her body and save her from plummeting to the ground. She looked at her waist to see a long black mass lifting her up into safety. When she looked to see where it was coming from, she saw the boy who she ran past at the entrance of the site, muttering to himself. Still surprised at being rescued, the girl was silent until the boy spoke. "Hey there, you looked like you needed some help." End of part 1. Thanks for watching my video, and please subscribe if you like it. Let me know what you think about my story in the comments section below.